Welcome guys, today I'm bringing you this sword, this guy, the Tachi. Okay guys, this is a replica of a Tachi sword sent to me as a sample for review from yeskatana.com. Now, before I get into this actual Tachi, some of you might be wondering, what is a Tachi and how is it different or similar to a katana? So the katana is undoubtedly the most recognizable Japanese sword, but before it was invented, there was the Tachi. The Tachi came before the katana. Samurai warriors on the island nation wielded a different sword. It was called the Tachi. Perhaps if it wasn't for the Tachi, the katana would never be invented. It is believed that Japanese swordsmiths began forging the Tachi during the country's Koto period, like 900 to 1596. Unlike previous swords produced in Japan, which were straight-edged weapons, the Tachi featured the first curved blade, thus improving its efficiency and versatility on the battlefield. Samurai warriors on horseback could easily draw and use the Tachi thanks to its curved blade. And so the curved blade of the Japanese weapon began with the Tachi. Genuine Tachi swords featured two hangers that allowed the sword to be worn horizontally with the cutting edge facing down. As we know, the katana has the cutting edge facing up. If you really examine some of the pictures of some ancient Tachi, you notice how extremely decorated and ornamented these swords were. You notice the extreme curvature of the blade and the extra thickness of the blade as well. Top quality materials were used to making the Tachis. They showed a level of class and sophistication and honor to the bearer of these swords. Until the katana was developed, the Tachi was a very formidable weapon and paved the way for all the grandeur and all the glory that the katana would harness. So guys, as you can see, there is a lot of history that goes into the Tachi sword as seen in the video. But how does this yeskatana representation of the Tachi compare to a good replica of a Tachi of today? Now, the first thing that we have to discuss, and you're going to be tired of me kind of mentioning it over and over again, is the fact of the price of this sword. The price of this sword is around $205 retail at yeskatana.com. I am not sure if that includes shipping or not. I would have to look into it further, but the actual sale price of this sword is $205. Now, $205 for any type of Japanese replica sword is a great price. It's a budget price type of sword, especially getting a Tachi sword with all the embellishments and all the koshiri that goes into making a Tachi, the hangers which are called ashi, all the pieces that go into making a Tachi. To get that type of replica of a Tachi sword, which is normally, you find Tachi swords replicas today in the $600 to $800 price point or much higher. Depending on the quality of the pieces that go into making the Tachi, it can definitely bring up the price of the sword over what you would normally pay for a katana with the same type of embellishments, I would say. So to get a Tachi representation of a sword at $205 is a pretty damn good price. Now, what we have to understand, guys, in order for them to give you a Tachi type of sword at $205, they're going to have to cut corners. They're going to have to cut corners in the quality of the pieces that go along, that go into making up the actual piece in its entirety. Now, I have been putting out many videos on this sword in terms of in the form of shorts, cutting with the sword, some snippets of cutting, some close-ups of the blade, the Damascus steel in the blade, and all of the finishing pieces. So you can barely see with the naked eyes the quality of the pieces that go into it and where they are cutting corners into giving you a sword, especially a Tachi sword, for a $205 price point. But you may be pleasantly surprised to see the quality that goes into this piece actually went more into the blade than anything else. So that's where they cut corners. Most of the price, I feel, went into the blade of the sword over everything else. So let's start with the pommel of the sword. Now on a tachi, this particular piece, and guys, if I mispronounce the Japanese terms, don't go crazy, all your traditionalists out there. I'll try my best. The pommel of the sword is called a kabuto gani. Okay, it's all the pieces here are a zinc alloy. They're like a kind of a goldish zinc alloy material. It's not very high quality. It's not iron. I mean, you could probably press very hard and you know, kind of bend it with your own hands. It's not meant to be very high quality. As far as the piece itself, there is a very snippet of movement here, not much. When I was handling it, it kind of stayed firm in my hand. This is after handling it. It's still, you know, kind of in place, so it didn't dislodge or get too loose or to the point where the ito or anything like that would kind of unwind. So it held its place pretty well. I thought it would actually be uncomfortable when I was holding it, but it was actually okay with kind of keeping, you know, using the real estate into this piece here in order to handle the sword, because it is about 11 inches, probably about 10.5 inches, the suba all the way to the end of the pommel. The knot here, I mean, you can tell it's you know, it's kind of sloppy, kind of put around. The ito in general, guys, is, I mean, you can move it, you know, with your own hands, you know, very easily. I mean, you can move it to the point where you could expose the wood core. It's not a very tight ito wrap, which I don't understand why they just, even though the price of the sword is the way it is, I wish they would just put a little bit more work into kind of tightening up the ito to the point where it's not going to get too loose in handling. But c'est la vie, I guess they cut corners in order to get the price of the sword as low as it is. The diamonds are, you know, fairly even. They're obviously not totally even. They're out of place, and even with handling, the ito kind of moved around a little bit, and the diamonds kind of moved, you know, out of place a little bit more than when I got it out of the box. But for the most part, you know, it handled well. It didn't unwind as I was using it, but it is noted that it is, you know, loose. I mean, you can move the ito, you can move the knot. It's not tightly in place as you would find on a very high quality sword. You notice the manuki and all the pieces are pretty much, you know, they're cheap castings. I mean, they're okay. They're cheap castings. Again, it's a zinc alloy material. It's not a very high quality metal or anything like that. But the manuki stay in place. They're fairly detailed, and I mean, they kind of fit the motif and the theme of the sword. This on the tachi sword is still called a fuchi. Again, the same zinc alloy. This is pretty tight in place. I can't really move it, but you could definitely move the ito around the fuchi pretty well. But they all have the same type of like flower petal patterns with the rigid, with like a grid pattern with some flowers around it, just to fit, again, the motif of the sword. So in terms of everything matching, everything kind of matches pretty well. The suba is, again, zinc alloy. It's not a very solid suba. They say it's zinc alloy and copper, but I don't know where the copper is. They might be saying the seppas or anything like that. Baki cannot not be copper. It's probably brass. So I don't know what exactly they're saying is copper, but everything looks kind of like the same type of zinc alloy material and a brass habaki. But again, for the most part, the suba held up. There is a little bit, very little movement, okay, in the suba. All the pieces are not extremely tight. There is some movement here and there. The fuchi's pretty tight. The kabuto gani is kind of loose on the end, but there is absolutely no movement in habaki. The habaki itself is, you can definitely get a fingernail in between the blade and the habaki, so you know it's not completely tightly fit. But again, it's serviceable. It fits well on the blade. There's no movement, there's no jiggle. It didn't vibrate, you know, as I was cutting, so it's in place pretty well. And this habaki is pretty much a very standard habaki that are pretty much on so many swords out of Lanquan, China. So you'll find this on many different swords. I think I have about 1 or 2 swords with the same habaki. There is some detail that's put into this habaki, but again, it's nothing that different from anything else. But again, within the $205 price point, it is going to be, you're going to be finding pieces that are fairly relative to many other swords, distribution bins that supply to many different companies to give you swords at this price point. So you notice the saya. The saya is actually pretty well done. I mean, the smooth finish of the saya is pretty nice. It's not too bad. Round collar tip on the saya is actually called a sayajiri. I believe it's called Sayajiri, and it's placed on pretty well. You know, there's not really any movement. I don't see any problem with this kind of dislodging. I mean, the adhesive or whatever they put on is pretty well. The saya itself is painted pretty well. You have a couple little designs on the saya. Again, you know, a tachi sword is ornamented and decorated extremely well. So this kind of tried to achieve that type of look, a beautifully painted saya and a couple little designs that are put onto the saya to give that tachi the look. Going up a little bit on the saya here, you have the piece here in the middle, which is called a semigani, which is a scabbard ring. Again, pretty tightly in place, same zinc alloy, same type of theme with the flower petals, with the rigid pattern and the flower petals on there. So again, I like how everything kind of just does match the theme of the whole sword. When you get into the center of the blade, you notice there's also some ito wrap that's wrapped around the center of the blade all the way to the tsuba here. I don't see any, the transition's not perfect, but it kind of matches up pretty well where aesthetically it looks good. Again, the ito wrap around the saya is, you know, is loose. It can move. You can move it from side to side. Is it a big problem? No. Especially for $205, you're not going to be expecting it to be that tight. What I didn't mention is the samigawa is obviously fake samigawa. It's kind of a rubbery material. You can see it with the naked eye where it's not a real samigawa, and I don't think they claim it to be real, but you can definitely see it's not real samigawa. I think this would have, the middle ito wrap though would have held in place a little bit better if they put also some samigawa or fake samigawa in between. It probably would have held in place a little bit better. But I like the actual look of the diamonds where you can see the saya on the inside too. Again, it fits a really nice motif. The actual hangers are actually called ashi. Okay, these are the hangers of the tachi, and these particular hangers go around the ito. Your actual obi belt goes in between here and wraps around, and it kind of hangs on your obi belt. That's how the ancient samurai wore their tachis, obviously with the point down. These particular hangers, where they would normally be metal or a higher quality, thicker leather, these are a very plasticky type of material. I mean, you can feel it to the touch. It's not done extremely well. It's a plasticky type of material, nothing high quality at all. You do have some zinc alloy rings here to hold it in place, and the actual wrap of the rope is done pretty well. I mean, it stays pretty tight. Okay, it doesn't look like it's going to move or shift on your belt, so that was done okay. Could it be done better if it was a better quality sword? Absolutely. But for what you're getting for this type of price range, this is actually not too bad, but it's going to be expected that you're not going to get very high quality in terms of the ashi hangers that you have here compared to spending $800 or over $1,000 on a very high quality tachi. So this is acceptable for this price point. So now getting to really what surprised me the most, guys, is the actual blade. Now, Damascus steel can actually be very beautiful. There could be some very beautiful patterns on the steel when you have a Damascus blade. I am all for folded steel and having, you know, some extra nice quality, nice visuals on a sword. When I see folded steel, I'm a very big fan of that. This Damascus, the beauty of this Damascus blade doesn't fail to impress me in terms of how the aesthetics that are lent into the blade over just a regular polished blade. So Damascus is definitely a beautiful pattern. Now, what concerned me about Damascus is the fact that Damascus, I don't know if a lot of you know, but Damascus steel is a lost art. The art of making Damascus steel was lost to the ages, so we don't really fully know exactly how they made Damascus steel back in ancient times. The Damascus steel that's made today is kind of just a modern type of invention, how they're making Damascus steel. So something that always concerned me was if the Damascus steel is not folded very tightly and done very well, they can form some air pockets in between the steel, and that would cause the steel to be prone to break or bend or take a set or roll or not be as strong as more of a solid construction type of mono steel blade. So that always concerned me to have a blade with Damascus steel, not really trusting the smith to see if they were able to forge it and make the Damascus steel right, and also make it a beautifully, aesthetically beautiful sword, but also make it a functional sword that's not going to break after a few cutting sessions. this blade really pleasantly surprised me. These are some shots of the sword after cutting. Now, other than, you know, some normal cosmetic scratches that developed on the blade from cutting through the materials, I actually went in with a macro lens, which was some of those later shots, really close-up shots of the blade. That was after cutting, but I could not find any chips, anything even that close that resembled any damage to the edge. So I was very impressed that, you know, it got through the materials. Now, listen, I wasn't out to like kind of abuse the blade or anything like that, but I was very curious to see how the Damascus would hold up. Now, you notice on every cut, I was slamming it into that plywood. This is, you would call a hard material, cutting into like that thick plastic of a Gatorade bottle, and again, slamming it into the plywood every single time, even when I was cutting the soft bottle prior to that. So I was checking out the blade at this point, and I didn't really see anything wrong with it. Again, after they did all the cutting, I could not find anything particularly wrong. So I was like kind of slamming into some petrified wood here, wood slices. Again, I don't recommend going out and chopping wood with your swords, but I really, since this was a sample sword, I really was very curious to see how it would go through wood, slamming it into the plywood every single time. And I could not find a way to kind of chip, bend, or have it take a set. I was very impressed with what came out. I would venture to say that the heat tempering was done very well on the blade. The folding of the Damascus steel was done pretty well. Is it worth investing in the Yeskatana? Is this Tachi sword at what it's priced? Is it worth the buy? Is it worth the look? I would honestly say, after doing some tests on it, after holding it, after handling it for about a month or so, I would honestly say yes. Only because it is priced at $205. So at $205, you have to expect that you're not going to have high, you know, top quality materials on here. But I'm pleasantly surprised with the quality of the blade, the resilience of the blade, cutting into materials that you normally wouldn't cut into materials like that. Now the blade is, you know, normal. It looks like kind of a Shinogi Zukuri on a katana. It's not. You would expect to have more of a sori on it, more of a blade curvature on a Tachi, but for the most part, in all intents and purposes, the blade fits the actual saya and the overall aesthetic of the sword pretty well. But I was really surprised in how resilient and how tough the Damascus steel production they put into this blade, and the sharpness of the blade, which, if you notice the blade as I showed it to you, there is it looks like a zero grind. It looks like there is actually a convex edge put on here, because it says it was hand sharpened to a very sharp edge, and I was pleasantly surprised in how sharp this thing came out of the box, and it is still pretty damn sharp even after cutting into the wood. So that would tell me that the heat tempering was done very well. The steel, the forging of the steel, the formation of steel was done very well, because it really did handle, you know, cutting into the wood, cutting into the hard pumpkins and things like that, just like unconventional things that you would normally not put a sword through into testing. I tried to do that from the get-go. So will this cut tatami? Will this cut bamboo? I would say it should probably handle it pretty well. Bamboo might be a little bit of a problem if you cut too much with it, but I think it'll be a really good tatami cutter, tatami mat cutter. You know, the hard plastic materials, the pumpkins, the you know, chopping into wood, it really handled it very well. I was very, very impressed. So I would say the $205 price point of this sword went really, mostly 80% of it went into the blade, and the other 20% they kind of cut corners just to give you this replica of the Tachi. So I would say, if you're looking to get a Tachi and you want a Tachi that's also you're gonna be able to use, you're gonna be able to cut with it, and you're gonna be able to be confident in cutting materials with it, I would highly recommend this at the price point. I think they priced it perfectly. They're not, you know, trying to trick people and saying, no, it's a Tachi, you know, for $400 or anything like that, and still give you these cheap, you know, materials that are on here, the zinc alloy and all that I mentioned. They're pricing it right. So from what I see so far from the Yeskatana, they're pricing their swords in the right manner to give you pretty much what you're paying for. Now, I am very much looking forward to getting more samples from Yeskatana, possibly some higher price samples, you know, in the $400 to $300 price point, to see what they offer in that price range. So I can't speak for that yet, because I can only speak for whatever sword I have in my hand. But I would say at $205 for what they're giving you here, a replica of a Tachi that has a very good blade, very good heat temper, beautiful Damascus steel, and I was able to cut with it confidently with no problem, without any chips, dips, bends, any damage to the blade whatsoever, and it still retained the sharpness after cutting those materials. I would say this is a very good buy at around $205 for the most part. So if you can get past some of the cheap materials, I would say this is a really nice Tachi for you to have, display, and be able to use. Some people may not like all the gold embellishments and all that, but if you look at historical Tachis, a lot of it was gold. Maybe not as shiny as this, but there was some gold embellishments in older Tachis as well. So there you have it, guys. This is a Tachi from Yeskatana. Go check out Yeskatana if you want a budget price sword. They are priced pretty well. I can't speak for their whole inventory, but for the most part, this is priced perfectly. Always appreciate you guys. Always appreciate your support. And so my new subscribers, thank you for joining me. And if you're not subscribed yet, please continue to subscribe, so this way I'll be able to give you more samples and give you more swords, an idea of what is out there and if it's worth it for you or not. Peace and love to you all. Thank you for joining me. To the next sword and knife video, I'll see you when I see you. Have a good one, guys. Ciao.